What's up guys, LeopoldTheBrave here, and now that I'm doing death battle videos again, I might as well try out one of those ranking videos, this one being my top 5 favorite and least favorite episodes of the series. So why am I doing a small top 5 for each topic in one video instead of giving both topics their own separate top 10s? Well, as for my favorite episodes, they all start to blend together and switch around after the number 5 position. So might as well keep it down to a nice, clean and compact top 5 that won't need to be changed or updated often. And as for the least favorites, an entire video with negativity just wouldn't be fun. So I'm keeping them together. Now before we begin, I want to emphasize that this is just my opinion. 100% my opinion. And I'm not just saying that to excuse bad or awful takes. I mean it. These are my top 5 favorite and least favorite, not top 5 best and worst. These rankings are quite literally based on how I feel, not anything specific like the animation or the research or the results. I actually agree with a couple of my least favorite episodes, and one of my most favorite ones has my preferred character lose. In fact, I even consider number 2 on my favorites list to be the objectively best death battle ever made, but I still like number 1 more. Just wanted to make sure I was clear about everything before we begin. I'm not claiming any rankings here to be factual. This is literally all my biased opinion. That's how favorites and least favorites work. Now let's hop on in. Favorite number 5, Crash vs. Spyro. If there's any episode that showcases how randomly episodes are going to be chosen for these lists, it's this one. Now this episode does have a few flaws that keeps it from being higher in the list and even makes it slip out of the top 5 sometimes. There's plenty of missing stuff, some flat out incorrect information, and my preferred character, Crash Bandicoot, loses. But even then, simply just seeing my Bandicoot boy in action is enough to give me an extreme love for this episode. Plus, it's not like I don't enjoy Spyro either. I love his games a ton too, just not quite as much as Crash. Hearing Wiz and Boomstick say his name and talk about the lore, it just puts a big ol' smile on my face. Except for the part where Wiz diagnoses Crash with a real-world developmental disorder. Yeah, that was something. The fight scene was pretty entertaining, however, even though Crash didn't get in a ton of good hits. I liked the reference to the chasing levels, Crash squashing Sparks was hilarious, Crash using Ken's super was really cool, and the music track is one of my favorites, sounding like it came right out of a Crash game. Yes, me liking this episode so much is heavily carried by the simple fact that Crash is in it, but it definitely isn't the only factor. Crash vs. Spyro was just a lot of fun. Least favorite number 5, Danny Phantom vs. American Dragon Jake Long. Why'd they put the whole thing in the title? I don't know. But man, I wish Nemesis and Biff didn't point out how not well this episode held up, because I remember being super excited for it and enjoying it quite a lot when it first came out. But when I watched it again recently to refresh my memory, they were right. Check out Nemesis and Biff's channels, by the way. I'll link them in the description if I can remember. So this episode is very accurate, and the research is actually very good. And it's a fight I've done myself before a long time ago and got very, very wrong. So I thought it'd be neat to see a better version of a fight I'd done before that fixes all my mistakes. But that's about where the positives end. While the research behind the episode is fantastic, the actual episode part, not so much. The fight scene overall was very slow, sluggish, and janky looking. It got better once they exited the museum, but that didn't last too long. The music in the fight also wasn't very memorable. Nothing terrible though. As for the humor in both the fight scene and the analysis, it was pretty dreadful, especially with Danny and Boomstick rapping. Normally I'm able to tolerate it a lot more than Friends when Death Battle makes bad humor, but not this time. It was actually secondhand embarrassment inducing. So yeah, this episode cracks the top 5 for being one that I used to like, but not anymore, which can sometimes sting a lot more than episodes you dislike from the very start. Favorite number 4, Iron Fist vs. Poe. Now there's quite a few death battles that I zone out during or just flat out skip over because I'm not too interested in the matchup. Giant robots and kaijus aren't my thing, and neither are comic book characters. I have bad eyesight, so it's hard to read a super long period of time. But if you really want me to tune into one of those fights no matter who it is, put them up against an animated movie character like Poe. Not only is Poe one of the very few characters who I've talked about in all 3 of my Versus shows over the past several years, but I'm also the only one I really know who's talked about him in great detail when it comes to Versus. Seeing Death Battle bring up all the obscure Kung Fu Panda facts in TV shows that nobody else really talked about was really neat. I do wish they would have at least acknowledged the potential of multiversal Poe though, because there are legitimate arguments for it, including statements from the writers and directors of the Paws of Destiny series about the spirit realm and Poe's power comparable to it. But oh well, that's hardly a flaw. I haven't even gotten into the fight scene yet, which is fantastic. The voice acting performances are incredible, especially Austin Lee Matthews' Poe. I don't know how Iron Fist is supposed to sound in TV shows and stuff, but I like what I heard from him in the death battle too. The use of props and the environment in the fight were awesome and really made it feel like it came out of Kung Fu Panda. The same goes for the fight's track, which is more of a movie score this time around rather than background music. And the episode as a whole was hilarious, even the jokes in the analysis. I especially like the detail where Boomstick's eyes lost their color and whited out when he used the Golden Lotus clap to blind himself. Nice attention to detail. I'd show you myself, but the Wiz and Boomstick segments are usually what get copyright claims, so I don't want to risk it. But overall, fantastic episode. Least favorite number 4, Yang vs. Tifa. This was the very first death battle ever that gave me the realization that they can be wrong sometimes? And considering I knew nothing about either of these characters when this episode came out, that's saying a lot. Since then, I have gotten a bit more educated on Tifa with the Final Fantasy VII Remake, and while I still haven't checked out Ruby, I've heard more than enough about it and this fight from others to know that, yeah, it should have been a stomp in Tifa's favor. Now, an episode simply being wrong isn't really enough to get it on my top 5. This one is just a little different, considering Screw Attack was buddy-buddy with Rooster Teeth at the time, so it felt a bit pandering towards them, and the audience, since fans of Ruby were also likely fans of Death Battle as well, so why not please the masses? The fight scene also isn't anything special, the environment is boring and hurts my eyes with how blue it is, and also Tifa's model doesn't look too great. The episode as a whole is nothing too terrible, it just leaves a sour taste in my mouth because it feels like it was made to make their future bosses smile, and not really for us. I do thank it though for being the episode to teach me to research stuff myself and not just take Death Battle's word on everything, so that was pretty nice of it. Favorite number 3, Almight vs. Might Guy. Of all the season finales Death Battle has done, this one is no doubt my most favorite, because they took what doesn't seem like a season finale worthy match, but made it into one with how good the episode is. It's not an epic battle between Marvel and DC heralds, there's no big video game rivalry, and there's no big name Saiyans from Dragon Ball either. It's just a random side character from Naruto versus a random mentor character from one of the many new popular shonens that are popping up in recent years. And yet they managed to make it feel like a big world title fight. I know that seems a bit disrespectful to refer to Might Guy as just a Naruto side character, but you know what I mean. It wasn't one of the main 3 or their main mentor Kakashi, and it wasn't one of the main villains either. Everything in this episode just felt so grand, from the fight scene to the research and the analysis. I even like how experimental they got with the research, giving All Might a multiplier based on his estimation of his power. The results were quite fresh too, having a winner who didn't survive in the end even though they ultimately did win the battle. If I had to give this episode one criticism, I guess it'd be that All Might does look really weird without his usual shading, but that's really easy to overlook when the fight scene is just that good. Plus the music track is one of my favorite death battles ever made. Guy opening his final gate followed by that guitar just gives me chills every time. Such a good episode. Least favorite number 3, Beast vs. Goliath. Now, despite me not being too into comic book characters for reasons I already mentioned, the X-Men are ones I actually am slightly interested in. Plus, I love my cartoon fights, especially when they bring in obscure characters like American Dragon Jake Long, Bucky O'Hare, and in this case, gargoyles. So, I was actually pretty hyped for this fight, and I remember liking it a lot. Unfortunately, like Danny vs. Jake, it didn't hold up too well, at all. Now, I always knew the fight scene wasn't anything special, but I remember thinking the analysis was super duper interesting and in-depth and I got super sucked into it. But now I'm just wondering what I was on back then, because that definitely still isn't the case. It's just such a boring drag to get through, and they play clips for way too long, likely to pad out the video length. Not to mention, this episode started what Biff and Nemesis have dubbed as the Golden Tree bit, where they make a feat sound super cool in the analysis, but in the results, actually it wasn't so great. I had definitely noticed this trope going on myself in the earlier Death Battle episodes, but never knew it started here until it was pointed out by them. But yep, like Danny vs. Jake, another episode I used to like but doesn't hold up. This one just has it way worse. Favorite number 2, Solid Snake vs. Sam Fisher. This is what I and many others consider to be the objectively best death battle ever made to this very day. The research went really in-depth and was really well done. They went into great detail about all their different gear and most important weapons, did a great job explaining their functions, and even went over Metal Gear lore in a very understandable way somehow. This is also probably the closest and most entertaining fight they've ever done. It literally just came down to their weapons, armor, and skills. No physical stats mattered like strength or speed. The fight scene honestly deserves its own video to describe how good it is. Maybe I'll do that someday in the near future, but for now I guess we'll just summarize. This fight has an actual story and end goal to it. Snake and Sam just trying to get data to complete their mission, and they just happen to be in each other's way. There's also the surprisingly lengthy but never boring opening of the fight that lets us get to know each character on their own before they start interacting with each other, something more death battles should do. There were also quite a few breaks and intermissions in the fight where Snake and Sam would catch up with their backups, Otacon and Grimm, but those somehow never got boring either. It was super in character and really made it feel like it could be a fight scene from either of their series. We got something similar in recent times with the whooshy fingerhold dialogue in Iron Fist vs. Poe, but nothing else I can think of at the moment. They should try out breaks and fights more often as long as it'd be fitting with the characters. But that's just how good Snake vs. Sam Fisher is. I'm able to complement the parts even when the characters aren't fighting. When they do get to fighting, it's super intense, with some of the best hand-to-hand combat death battles ever had. The whole "you're pretty good" bit before the final knife showdown actually manages to make me tear up whenever I watch it. I can't think of any other death battle that does stuff like that to me. The only flaw I can think of in the fight scene is when Snake immediately updates Otacon after getting the data, knowing full well that Sam can get back up and shoot him. That was really dumb. But at the end of the day, that's just a nitpick in the best death battle ever made. Least favorite number 2, Bowser vs. Ganon. According to some, apparently this was the episode that prompted the research team to be even more involved. So if that's any indicator of how the fight went, yeah. Now Ganon is my preferred character in this matchup, but they really should have gone ahead and had him fight Dracula from the beginning, instead of having to go through Bowser and get this weird no limits fallacy argument. Sure, Bowser has cosmic levels of power, a ridiculous speed advantage, and even some defense against magic. But because he doesn't have a holy weapon, Ganon wins. Goku would also be in the same boat. He doesn't have holy weapons either. I mean, I guess you could count the Spirit Bomb since it only harms evil and not good, but that would take way too long to charge. I guess Ganon wins that one too. See how that logic doesn't work? Now, no matter how wonky the research was, a fight scene between these two had amazing potential to be incredible to watch. Potential that they sadly did not reach. The first half of the fight was pretty interesting, I liked the whole tennis bit, but as soon as that ended, the second half just got so slow and boring, pretty much amounting to Bowser takes 15 seconds to try something that doesn't work. Now overall, Bowser vs. Ganon is a really cool matchup, even if it is a big stomp in Bowser's favor, but not only did they get it wrong with a no limits fallacy, which is a big no-no in versus, but they also couldn't make up for it with a cool fight scene. So I think this is a good spot for it to be on the list. Favorite number 1. Heihachi Mishima vs. Geese Howard. Yes, I'm extremely biased. There's a Tekken character in it, and the Tekken character won. I told you, that's how these favorites and least favorites lists are gonna work. But I guess I should explain myself more, because as that Elon Musk joke that goes on for way too long demonstrates, it clearly doesn't have the writing quality of Snake vs. Sam. And the fight scene, while incredible in its own right, doesn't quite stack up to it either. Tekken bias aside, the load-bearing portion of this episode that actually gets it to number 1 is the research. And I don't just mean it's good and accurate research, but it's research that feels like I influenced it. Now, that probably isn't the case at all, but it certainly feels like it. Let me explain. There are certain things they mentioned back during Ryu vs. Jin that they took a complete 180 on in Heihachi vs. Geese that I had mentioned before then. Tekken Tag Tournament 2 being canon as a huge example. Originally in Ryu vs. Jin, they said it was non-canon simply because it was a spin-off. But since then, I had brought up several instances in Tekken 7 that had info or events that completely relied on things that happened exclusively in Tekken Tag 2, proving it is canon. There's no official statement saying Tag 2 is non-canon either, people just assumed it was because of its spin-off nature, so I'm glad Death Battle changed their mind for Heihachi vs. Geese. There's also feats they never brought up until I did, like Heihachi intercepting one of the forehead lasers. That definitely would have come in handy in Ryu vs. Jin since Jin would no doubt be able to scale to that. But I guess it got overlooked until I brought attention to it. I even felt my influence down to the way they just simply word certain things, like referring to the forehead lasers as forehead lasers, instead of using their canon name, Hellfire Cannon, or Devil Beams as the Tekken community usually calls them. I realize all of this sounds extremely egotistical, and don't worry, I doubt my research and work on Tekken over the past several years actually had any weight in this battle. But regardless of if it did or not, it still shows how their research has improved over the past couple years, and how the series as a whole keeps getting better and better, and that's more than enough to make it my favorite death battle of all time. Least favorite number 1, Tracer vs. Scout. Again, I'm not going to lie to you or try to hide it. I'm extremely biased. That's how favorites and least favorites work. I love the Scout, and I don't even own Overwatch. Now think back to the first death battle we talked about in this video. Crash Bandicoot, my preferred character, lost, yet the episode was still one of my favorites just by him being there. Scout is definitely one of those characters that could do that too, so why is this one any different? Well, it's because Crash vs. Spyro is correct. This one isn't, and just like Yang vs. Tifa, there's something on top of it that leaves a sour taste. See, this death battle released in September of 2016, less than 4 months after Overwatch released, and considering how long death battles take to make, they must have started right when the game came out. Now, I did do Tracer vs. Scout in my own versus show before Death Battle, but my show doesn't take nearly as long to make, so I likely started way later. Plus I had Scout win, so I clearly wasn't trying to celebrate Overwatch hype. Overwatch has had tons of content since it released, and its versus stats are all over the place, so who knows if Tracer actually beats Scout now. But back then when this episode came out, she definitely didn't, and Scout was mistreated so badly. They pulled a golden tree move on his rocket feet, but never actually explained how it wasn't that impressive. They also ignored lots of Tracer's weaknesses, one of them being that she can't blink when she's all stunned, which many of Scout's weapons could do to her. I'm glad they gave Scout more than his stock loadout, but they got some of the functions of his other weapons completely wrong, like his Bonk Atomic Punch, and even left out some specific ones that would help him wipe the floor with Tracer pretty easily. Weapons that can heal himself, all of his magic spells, his laser pistol, which should logically fire thousands of times faster than Tracer can react to, along with his Bat Saber, which can completely vaporize human bodies, which requires a lot more energy than anything Tracer has survived, even to this day. All of that combined with the fight animation, which looks super duper janky and has Scout, the fast dodgy character, standing around and walking really slowly the entire time, makes this a really dreadful episode. And it's easily my least favorite. I'm just glad pandering to the trend backfired. And that's that! I absolutely refuse to end this video on a negative note though, because Death Battle is an amazing show and it honestly deserves better. Scout vs Tracer may not have been anything great, but it's almost 5 years old at this point. There have been plenty of Death Battles before it, like Snake vs Sam Fisher, and after it, like Almight vs Might Guy, that show how incredible Death Battle can be at its peak. The highest highs of this series far surpass the lowest lows, and there's no way over 100 episodes of awesomeness can be brought down by 5 little duds. So Ben Singer, thank you for the incredible show. It means a ton to me and I'm looking forward to the next 100. But let me know what you guys think. What are your opinions on the matches I discussed today, and what are your top 5 favorite and least favorite? Tell me down in the comment section below and I'll see you guys next time. Leopold the Brave, out.